From Kenora-Rainy River.
Thank you. My question is to the Premier. Speaker, this week we learned that poverty and homelessness continue to grow in Northern Ontario. This Liberal government's rhetoric and record on homeless and poverty simply do not match up. In Sudbury, the homeless population has more than doubled since 2009. Shockingly, almost 1% of Sudbury's population is homeless. Rates of homelessness and poverty in North Bay and Timmins are higher than the rest of Canada. This government is failing vulnerable people, families and children in Northern Ontario. Will this Premier admit that her government's inaction is forcing marginalized people in Northern Ontario to pay the price?
Good question.
Minister responsible for poverty strategy,
Minister responsible for poverty strategy reduction.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and thank you so much for the question. And as I hope the member realizes that I recently co-chaired an expert panel on homelessness with my colleague, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, to actually make our commitment to end homelessness in Ontario a reality. We have now developed the strategy, Speaker. We know what we have to do. We absolutely did hear loud and clear in those panel meetings about the diversity of homelessness and the diversity of poverty across the province. We know that solutions that might work in large urban centres will not work in rural centres, that the north is way different than the south.
Answer.
So we will, working with our partners across all levels of government and beyond, Speaker, the not-for-profit sector, the business community, we will end chronic homelessness within 10 years.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Back to the Premier. Speaker, the numbers speak for themselves. While Indigenous people only represent about 8.2% of the population in Sudbury, they represent about 43% of the homeless population. More than half of people at risk of homelessness have mental or physical health problems. 182 homeless people in Sudbury are children under the age of 18. The Premier must acknowledge that this is unacceptable. This government's neglect of vulnerable people in Northern Ontario is atrocious. Speaker, will the Premier admit that she is failing families and children in Northern Ontario and tell us what her government is doing about it?
Thank you. Minister.
Speaker, you know, I know the tone of the question is confrontational, but in fact the substance of the question is completely aligned with our work on this. We have identified 4 population groups that we are focusing on first when it comes to homelessness, and we are talking about youth and homeless, Speaker. Youth, Aboriginal people, people who are chronically homeless. That means they've been homeless for 6 months or longer. And I think very importantly, Speaker, people who are transitioning from government organizations or institutions like the Children's Aid Society. We don't think anyone should leave one part of provincial care into homelessness. There's a lot of work ahead of us. I'm counting on the third party to support us as we do this hard work.
Thank you. New question, the member from Scarborough Agincourt.
Questions for the